Hi there, my name's Nicole and I am so glad that you've chosen to join us here at Tweed Salvos. I wonder if we might have a little bit of fun together, just to start. What I want you to do is to simply put your hand up right where you are, put your hand in the air and keep it there while I ask you some questions until you answer, not me, you, until you answer no. All right, are you up for it? Was that clear? All right, so hand up and here we go. All right, some questions. First question. Have you ever told a driver to slow down or watch out while you were the passenger? Have you ever insisted that another person try a food that you were eating? If you had the choice, would you be the sole keeper of the TV remote control? What about this one? Do you get anxious or annoyed or want to step in when someone does a task a different way to the way that you do it? All right, last one. Have you ever given a family member the evil eye or kick under the table when they didn't behave a certain way? All right, if your hand is still in the air, chances are that you might just have control freak tendencies. You can put your hand down now. I need to put two hands up because I know that I certainly have control freak tendencies. I have the tendency to want to, everything and everyone to be just as I would want them to be. That's the honest truth. And control is what we're talking about today in our series that we've called Inside Out. And control is an interesting one because control of yourself or self-control, it's actually one of the qualities that the Apostle Paul said was evidence of the Spirit of God at work in someone's life. So to that extent, it would be a good thing. Similarly, I guess you could say having control over a vehicle that you're driving, or the hairdresser having control over the scissors that they're using. That's good, right? That's good control. I think we'd also hope that maybe a teacher had control of their class, and we'd expect that parents had control of their young children, at least to a certain extent. But there's this very fine line between good control and when control does not reflect the heart of Jesus, even when it comes to ourself, to self-control. Disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder, anorexia and bulimia, or perfectionism, they're examples of how even the self-control fruit of the Spirit of God can very easily go rotten, I guess, if you like to use that analogy. And it's that side of control that doesn't reflect the heart of Jesus, that side that we're going to focus on just now. Because if we're honest, it's in all of us to a different extent. And when you get to the root cause of it, you'll inevitably find fear. Maybe it's fear of not being enough, fear of not having enough, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of the unknown, maybe fear of pain or fear of being alone. We fear, and to try and make that fear go away, we control. Like Sarah and Abraham in the book of Genesis in the Bible. God tells them that they're going to have kids, but they're getting older. Significantly older actually, and it hasn't happened yet. And when fear creeps in, they take control and they decide, well, Abraham had better sleep with his younger servant. Or in Exodus chapter 32 in the Bible, the whole community of the Israelites, they were overcome with fear when Moses had been up on the mountain for a very long time meeting with God. And so in their fear, they decided, okay, we're going to control this. And they melted down their jewelry to make a calf that could go before them in case the pillar of fire and cloud never came back. Or what about the mum of the sons of Zebedee? I like this one. You'll find this recorded in Matthew 20. And she's overcome with fear that her boys won't have enough. So she takes control and she bowls up to Jesus, it tells us, and asks him to save a place for her boys either side of him in heaven. It's just what happens. We fear, and to try and make the fear go away, we control. I wonder actually if that's why 365 times in the Bible God commands us, do not fear. He says it in the Old Testament in all sorts of ways, and then Jesus says it too over and over, do not fear. I mean, when you think about it, people take the 10 Commandments so seriously. And each of those, it's only said once, but 365 times God commands, do not fear, do not fear. Because fear leads us to want to control. So let's take a look at an encounter that Peter had with Jesus where Peter reacted with control. And let's learn here, what would Jesus do? That's what we're about, right? Trying to be like Jesus as Christians. So let's see exactly what would Jesus do when this unhealthy control shows up. If you've got a Bible, you'll find this story in the book of Matthew, chapter 16, starting at verse 21. It says this: "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." Hit pause. Imagine for a second your closest friend. Got it? Now imagine your closest friend telling you that they have to go to a country where they know they're going to be tortured and killed and then brought back to life again. Can you imagine the feelings of fear that you would have for them? The feelings of fear that you'd have for yourself, that you would lose them to this world. All right, keep that in mind as we keep reading. From verse 22, it said, "Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. 'Never, Lord,' he said, 'this shall never happen to you.'" Here's this control, right? You see, just like us, Peter experiences fear, and his fear leads him to try and control Jesus and control what Jesus does and control this situation. And he figures if he can just control this, the fear will go away. Never, God. No, this can't happen, Jesus. Have you ever thought that? Maybe if I can just control my schedule that little bit more, I'll get it all done and that fear of not being good enough will go away. Or maybe if I can just control this relationship and keep all of those walls up so that they stay at a safe distance. You know, if I don't get too attached, then that fear of being hurt will go away. If I can just control what they think, you know, it's unhealthy control. Now, what does Jesus do here? Well, in verse 23, it says, "Jesus turned and he said to Peter, 'Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men.'" Whoa. What does Jesus do? Well, Jesus calls it out. He brings it into the light for exactly what it is. You know, this kind of control doesn't reflect the heart of Jesus. That's what he tells Peter. You know, this is not the fruit of God's Spirit control. This is worldly control. This is the things of men, Jesus says. You know, and he said, "Get it behind me. Get behind me." So when unhealthy control rears its head in your life, the first thing, if you want to follow after the way of Jesus, is to bring it into the light. We need to expose it and call it out for what it is, earthly thinking. This is not of God. We need to bring it into the light. And let's not forget that Jesus is the light of the world. So we bring it into the light by bringing it to the light, you could say. You know, we need to be people that are humble enough to be constantly praying that prayer that King David prayed in Psalm 51. Maybe you know it. He said, "Search me, Jesus, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thought." Did you hear that? Those fears. He said, "See if there's any offensive way in me." There's anything that is of this earth and not of God, in other words, and lead me in the way everlasting. And incidentally, we not only have to be humble enough to pray that prayer, we have to be humble enough to receive the answer too. So to deal with unhealthy control, what would Jesus do? Well, the first thing that he did was to bring it into the light. And that's what we need to do, bring it into the light. Now let's go back and look at that verse 23 again. Look at what Jesus said to Peter in the second part of that verse. He said that Peter had the things of men in mind, not the things of God. See, Jesus, on the other hand, has the things of God in mind. Of course he does. He is God. So if we want to deal with unhealthy control, we need to get the things of God in mind. In other words, I guess you could say we need to meet it with the truth, with Jesus. Jesus is the truth. And what did Jesus say? Well, so many things. He said, first of all, to Peter in verse 25, he said this. He said, For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. Jesus also said things like, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you wear, I'll supply your needs. He said that in Matthew 6:25. Jesus said, if you then, though you're evil, know how to give good gifts to your kids, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? That was in Matthew 7. He said, what you did for the least of these, you did for me. Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Just a few of the things Jesus said, so many more. But to deal with unhealthy control, that's what we need to do. We need to bring it into the light. We need to expose it for exactly what it is. This is unhealthy control. This is not godly thinking. And then we need to meet it with the truth, with Jesus and his words. And then what would Jesus do? Well, look at verse 24 with me. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. See, Jesus would choose the cruciform way, the way of the cross. This vertical reaching up to God and this horizontal reaching out to others. It's the way of surrender, which is actually the opposite of control. That's what Jesus would do. He would choose the cruciform way. You see, control has us turning inward. It has us reaching to ourselves for the solution, pulling others towards our way, ourself, where the cruciform way reaches out in surrender. The cruciform way opens us up to surrender our fears to God. It opens us up to surrender the details and the outcome to him. And it opens up our life to surrender it as a servant of others, to others. If anyone would come after me, Jesus said, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So bring it to the light, meet it with the truth, and choose the cruciform way. I wonder if you can think of areas in your life where unhealthy control shows up. If you're sitting with a friend or family member, I'm sure that they could help you if you can't. But there's no shame to be felt in that, because that desire to unhealthily control, it's in all of us if we're honest. And it so often connects with the other unhealthy sides of anger and envy and pride that we've been looking at the last few weeks. However, as we've heard really clearly from Jesus, it doesn't reflect his heart. And nor does it drive out your fear, by the way. That's a complete illusion. You can control till the cows come home, but whatever that underlying fear that drives it, the only thing that casts out fear is perfect love. And perfect love is only found in Jesus. So let me encourage you to reach out to Jesus today and have those fears quietened with his presence, which is perfect love. And from that starting point, be like Jesus. Bring it to the light. Call it out for what it is, and meet it with the truth. Choose the cruciform way. Let me pray with you. Jesus, I just want to pray the words of a song that simply says, to be like Jesus, this hope possesses me in every thought and deed. This is my aim, my creed, to be like Jesus. This hope possesses me, his Spirit helping me. Like him, I'll be. Jesus, we want to be like you. But you know how these tendencies show up in our life, tendencies that don't reflect your heart. And so I just really want to pray for people today and their fears. The fears that lead them to all sorts of behaviours that don't reflect your heart. And God, I pray today that your perfect love would cast out fear. I pray that in your perfect love, people might know that they are enough. People might know that they are loved and accepted just the way they are. that people might know that you walk with them, that you are their protector and provider, and that you are faithful to your promises and you will keep them as you have promised you would. God, help us to trust you and just to live our lives under the shadow of your wing, walking alongside you as our friend, our guide and our saviour. Amen. Thanks again for joining us. Really glad you did. And if you're ever in the Benora Point area, please pop down to our Benora Point campus. Every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock we meet together as a family, and we would love to have you join us.